marker starts jumping. So if we have an event where whenever we jump over an obstacle, and let's go ahead and reopen up the book here. In this observer pattern, so we have, let's see, our class. So I think, okay, the subject, the notification is evoked by the object being observed. Now they just called this like class subject. I wonder if it would be better to call it like class event. And it looks like we're gonna spin up events from this subject. I'm thinking about going with the second method that they're using here, which is yeah, observers today. So in observers today, I think he talks about it's more functional. So it's just creating a single function or a method instance off of that class. And then I can, so if I instantiate a bunch of instances off of like the event class, and so if we look at subject, okay, this is still part of the linked list stuff. I don't think we're going to need to use linked list for ours. I think a simple array will work for us. Right, so add observer, remove observer. But we're going to have a bunch. So instead of just like a singleton subject that just has, one different event that you can listen for, we'll spin off events from this subject class. Then it'll be add observer, remove observer, and notify. Then whenever the event happens, the object that has that like event instance can, well, I guess it will call the notify, but then other things that need to be notified will take that instance and register themselves. So then they'll get a callback that's called. I think that's how we can do it. So if we create a new folder, a new file here, and I call this like our event event.js. So let's do class event. We'll create a constructor. So we'll do this dot. It's not really going to be events. It's more going to be like this dot observers. And we'll initialize this to an empty array. And we know that we're going to want to add observer. And we know that we're going to want to remove observer. And then we know that we're going to have this notify. And I think that's pretty much going to be it. So we'll have this event. We can have the first event be the jump over. So let's see. Let's now add event into our index.html because that's what we're doing here. I named it event with a capital E. Rename that event with a lowercase e. All right. Say view. Okay, everything should be working now. All right, so add observer. We're going to take an observer, and we're just going to push that observer onto this array. Okay, so that allows us to add it. Now remove it might be a little bit more interesting. What does the observer look like? Like what's unique about this observer that we know that we can walk through and remove it? Unless, of course, it's as simple as we take in the exact instance of this observer that we're expecting to call. So maybe, is this a callback? Like, is observer just a callback? That would be really interesting. So if we take observer here, now it's pretty simple. We can do an index of. So this dot observers dot, I think it's splice, removes elements from an array. Then in here we need the start number, so that's going to be this dot observers dot index of the observer. So if we can find the index of the observer, we're going to remove one of them. Okay, so that removes the observer. And then we have notify. So we have we don't need to take observer in. I think, let's see, in notify. Oh, entity and event. So we're going to bring in entity and event. We're now going to just walk through. So this dot observers dot for each, get an observer, and we're going to call observer and pass in entity and event. And so I think that this is the general idea about this. Now we can spin up events based upon like what would actually happen. So in our main game, let's create some events. So let jump over obstacle. That's an event, right? And when I can instantiate it right here. So this is a new event. Now is there? Oh, okay. There is an event like with a capital E that already exists. We should probably not use just event itself like that. Let's change the name a little bit. So maybe like event system. So we change index to HTML to event system, and then in event system itself here, I'm going to change you to event system. Everything else can stay the same, and in game we'll do new event system. Okay, that shouldn't cause any conflicts now. Okay, so we have jump over obstacle is like one of these events. We need to register a callback when that happens. And then we need to, of course, call it when it happens too. So let's go like maybe for the calling part. Right now, how do we know if something jumped over an obstacle? Well, the player should know, right? Like the player should, when it does the jump command, it could maybe like get an instance. So let's go take a look at the player. Right now, I know this is not how it works. Jump is literally just jumping here. Now it's possible. It's possible that we can have a completely we have, where are we doing it right now? It is, oh, I remember. When the obstacle goes off the left of the screen, that's when we're having our score go up. So if the game is running and we're not rebinding, obstacle update. And so if we go into this update, we go into the obstacle. Yeah, so here's where this player increment score happens. And I don't think that this is the best place to put it. Resetting, just moves it over. But what we really want to do, because it might be a little bit confusing, if you jump over the obstacle, you quickly look up your score and it's the same thing. But now you have to look back down again because the next obstacle is coming and they're getting faster. So it might be nice to actually have that update happen as soon as we jump over. The player is aware of when an obstacle has been jumped over. So if we don't do this here, for example, if we remove that, reset is just a basic reset. We don't need to take in player anymore. Also, why did I have run speed? Obstacle update. Oh, that's reset. Here, we don't need you, which means we don't need you. And therefore we don't need you. But now the score won't ever update again. So if the player gets past those two obstacles, the player can, while jumping, determine if the obstacles are now to the left of them. And I think this is sort of what he was saying in the book, where, hey, your physics engine now has to be kind of sort of aware of these things that are happening. I can totally understand that. Now, what if we put that into the player update though, instead of the jump? If inside the player we have jump and we have update. In update, we can check to see the location of the two obstacles. Are you now to the left of us? I think that could be good here in update. So let's take in obstacle. Let's take in an array of these obstacles. So obstacles. But now, if we want to be able to call that notify, we're gonna need the what did I call it? It is the jump over obstacle. So in constructor, along with location, we're gonna have to have jump over obstacle event. Then we'll store that internally. Now we can call the notify. Now is the score, yeah, the score is stored in the player itself. I mean, so it would be a little bit silly to, I guess, use this entire notification system if the player is the one holding the score. But what if the player doesn't hold the score? What if we do what they suggest and have this UI class? And then the UI class does it. That might be really interesting too. And it might clean up some of that main game logic code. Like abstract some of that away. So in here in update, we need the list of obstacles. We now want to loop through these obstacles. So obstacles.forEach. Now, for each of these obstacles, did I jump over it? Well, the easiest thing for this is before we do exactly what they did. We track the obstacle position before we add the velocity and the location, and then again afterwards. Ooh, so I'm gonna have to do this loop through twice. So because I know that there's only 2 obstacles, maybe for right now, let's just do obstacle 1, obstacle 2. Let's store the jumped over successfully for the first one here. So let's see. Let maybe even like const the player is actually only if ever falling. Oh, you know what? I'm doing this in the wrong place. The player stands still. The obstacles are the ones that are moving. The obstacle needs to have the event. And so the obstacle can be past the player and know whether or not the player jumped over it. Okay, I think that's what I need to do. So we're not going to store this event here. Okay. I'm getting it in obstacle. This is where we're going to do it. So this is jump. Player jumped over obstacle event. Okay, so we store the event locally. And then in our update, we add our velocity, and then we call this .reset. So we're going to need to take in the player here as well. We'll store the initial player location. So const initial, and it's really our location because the player is the same. There's the initial obstacle, so initial location. And let's clone. So this is going to be this dot location dot clone. I think it's clone. We'll find out when if it errors out. Okay, so we clone that. Then we add the location of velocity, and now we have the new location. So we need to know if the middle of the obstacle is now to the left of the middle of the player. I mean, that shouldn't be too hard. So if we were to the right, so if this initial location, the middle of the obstacle, so our width and height, I think, let's see, when we draw fill 0, this location dot x and y, and then we have like the 2 arms. Okay, so the location dot x already is the middle, so that's fine. Really, I want to calculate are we to the right of the player, and then are we to the left of the player? That's really. So is like essentially is right. Well, we kind of want a function for this, right? Is right of player. We want this to be a Boolean. So that sounds like a function here. So is right of player. We're going to take in the player, and we're going to just return a Boolean. So if the middle of us, so this.location.x, so return this.location.x, if that is greater than, to the right, of player dot, and I think it's going to be player.location.x plus half of the player's width. So player.width divided by 2. That should let us know if we're to the right of the player. And then we want to see, are we now to the left of the player? Is left player. I'm going to take in the player. Turn this dot location dot x is now less than player dot location dot x plus player dot width divided by 2. Now in our update, we'll just grab right of player. So const is to right of player equals this dot is right of player. Pass in the player. We add the location, and now we're going to find out, are we to the left of the player? So, and if we don't need to do that calculation and do that, greetings, hello Chantilly, good morning. Am I getting better at math? Maybe. This one feels a little bit less like it's the math heavy, like the entire math heavy thing. It feels like it might be more of I need to like just where to put the logic and where, you know, how it goes. So I don't know if I'm getting better at that. It does take me a few times of like, okay, let me try to put it in there. It's sort of like puzzle pieces where I'm like, just putting in random places until like, oh right, it goes there. Now we can have an if statement here. So if is to write a player is true, and now this dot is left of player. If this is true, so if they were both true, then we're going to call that notification. So this dot player jumped over obstacle event. And if I remember correctly, it's going to be the entity and the event. So the entity is going to be the player. And the event, so we need some, I guess we need some globals here. And I think the best place to put that is probably just like some globals, like I don't know, I'll just call it globals.js. And these will be const event player jumped over. Actually, I guess it would just be event jumped over obstacle. Equals true. Just, yeah, just because I think it has to be like true like that. I mean, I guess I could also call it event jumped over obstacle. Save this. Let's add this into index.html. We're going to add it first. And this is going to be globals.js. Save you. So an obstacle, we should now be able to use you. And what did I call this? Event jumped over obstacle. Chief Mustardo, good morning. Yes, I am one of CJ's mods. Although I'm like, when he streams, I'm rarely available, so I'm not there too often, unfortunately. Let's see. This player player. Okay, so then this is the event that we pass in, and there we go. Okay, so then we say, okay, this dot player jumped over. Oh, and it's dot notify. Dot notify. So we need to tell them, hey, this thing happened. Here's the thing it happened to, and here's the actual like event itself. So, how the same you mainly go for his VODs, then streams as well. I stream mostly in the mornings too, so I get I'm good for all of you over in Europe and that other side of the world, other side of the pond, as it were. But yeah, it's tough for us sometimes to like stream after work over here. We've notified that there's an event. I think the player, so because the way we do the score, the player can be the one that listens to this event. So we do need to pass that into the player. So in game.js, we have this jump over obstacle. Let's actually name it event there. When we create the player, so that player, so new player, create vector for location, and we're going to do jump over obstacle event. So just pass that instance in. We're going to save this, come over to player, jump over obstacle event, and store it. Do I need to store it? Because I really just need to register. I guess I need to store it just in case. I need to like unregister. So this dot jump over obstacle event equals jump over obstacle event. But then the very first thing I want to do with this is register the callback function that I want to do when we increase our score. And so here we have this increment score right here for it. So we're going to do this dot jump over obstacle event dot add observer. Now, should I be passing like just myself in, like the instance of this player in? And if I do that, okay, then an instance, like a reference to this player goes into this add observer. If I do that, when we call notify, we're going to pass in the entity and the event. I guess we shouldn't just call observer like a function then. There should be a function on the observer. How does that work? On notify, we take in this. Okay. Oh, it's on notify. So we have an on notify method on player here. So on notify, and this takes in the entity and the event. So in event system, we do observer dot on notify, like that. Okay, so now we're going to have the entity. We know that we're registering ourselves. The entity is ourselves. But we can still, and we know what the event coming in is. So if the event is equal to this global. Then we want to call increment score. So it's going to be entity dot increment score, like that. And I think that's going to do it. So the obstacle is no longer incrementing our score for us. It's sending out a notification, hey, this thing happened when I jumped over you. Let's see whether or not it works. That was a lot of code before we tried. Ooh, no, we broke it. Type error, can't access property location. Player is undefined. So that is obstacle line 44. Don't close. Obstacle line 44. Okay, so here we have this player.location at x and player.width. So is right of player is coming from this update. So we're getting a player from this update. In game, when we call obstacle.update, we're not passing in the player. So we need to do that. There we go. Okay, so that didn't work there. Can't access property notify. This dot player jumped over obstacle. Make that bigger. Make this full screen. All right, what did it say? Type error, can't access property notify. This dot player jumped over obstacle event is undefined. And that's an obstacle.js line 28. Right. Let's see, line 28 in obstacle. So the jumped over obstacle event dot notify. We have a notify in here. So when we create our obstacle, are we properly passing this in? So in game, when we create the obstacles, no, we are not. So we need to pass in this jump over obstacle event. Now they'll both send these notifications. Actually, make you go to the right. That's the left. I want to go to the right. There, that's about the size of the game anyways. So let's refresh. Hey, look at this. The game updates immediately as soon as I jump over the obstacle. So that's exactly what I wanted. So now our event is working. Okay, that's perfect. So the score goes up immediately because the player is notified as soon as they jump over an obstacle, and they're notified instantaneously. We can now add more obstacles, and it will just automatically work for us. Let's see, spacebound, restart game bound. I don't know if we necessarily need to add like any other events to anything else that happens in this game. Like that's the main one, right? I suppose we could have events be on like for the input handler, but then it would be the, if I were to put an event on the input handler, what would that end up looking like? So input handler, right now it just returns. So in the main game, we call the input handler and we get the commands that we need to run, and then we just loop the commands and we run them and pass in whatever we need to. I think that's fine. Now, they did talk about putting the UI into its own class. If I did that, then a lot of this sort of like text that we have here would go into another file. Then we'd only have the we wouldn't have very much like else going in here. We just have the logic, like this game logic here, because everything else pretty much is if we're rebinding false. Yeah, because the input handler needs to know if the game is running or not. I suppose another potential way to refactor would be to have notifications for, hey, when is the game running? Then we don't have to pass into input handler, hey, the game is now in this running state. It's tracking that itself based upon the notifications it's gotten. Of course, if it fails to get a notification for some reason, that would be really bad. But that might clean up and make it so it knows what to return for commands. So I can just say, hey, get me all the commands that we can possibly run or that need to be run right now. And it's like, okay, here you go. And then the UI, that could be abstracted out too. However, none of that is necessarily like events type stuff. So I think this is it. I think it's just the score that we're going to be doing for the let's see. Oh, you know what? The collided with an obstacle. Yeah, that is a good one to do. I forgot that we put that in. So collided with an obstacle. Where does that happen? Is that in player? So the player is hitting the obstacle. I wonder again if this would be good to put in each obstacle, or if we want to keep it here. Now we're only running it once per frame here, whereas if we put in an obstacle, it'll be running twice per frame. So that's not necessarily the best thing. Although, you know what? This is running twice per frame, isn't it? Because we're passing both obstacles in. Like we're calling is hitting once here in the game. Yeah, we're looping through the obstacles. And then we're saying, hey, are we hitting the obstacle? I mean, we could easily put this on the obstacle as well. Are you hitting the player? And it wouldn't really make that much of a difference. Now, if I did that, who cares about receiving the notification? It would be this game, like the entire game state. So if I did that, would I want some kind of game like a state management system that's more official than just booleans that I've created here globally? Because we're like game running true. This is the state management that I have essentially. So we want this to reset to false. I could, of course, register. Well, no, I can't because it takes in a class. So I can't register a event without a class to be registered for. So if I have like a game state class, I can have it register for the event and it tracks if the game is running. Then we can ask, hey, game, are we running? Input handler, are you rebinding? And then we run the rest of this stuff. So I would need, okay, if I refactor to using a game state, does that really make sense for this to like abstract it away from here? It might clean it up. It's a little bit hard for me to like tell if it's worth the effort for that, because I might just be creating an abstraction that's going to make it harder to refactor later if something else comes up that's competing refactor. So if I think about the solid principles, one of the tenets of it is abstract away things that have different sources of change and different rates of change, and put all of them in their like own groups together. So if I have like my game state, it's changing. Now by changing I mean like source code changes. Like how often am I changing like the source code for like the game state compared to everything else? The source of change is just me. Like I'm the only developer here. So it's really just the source of change, like the rate of change. The game state mostly has remained the same this entire time. We have paused, we have plain, we have paused, and I suppose we have rebinding. But right now we're having to ask the input handler, are we rebinding? But would it be better if the game state was the one who kept track of that? The input handler sent a notification, hey, we're rebinding now. That might be really interesting. So if I store this, let's see, in a README. So cleared with your obstacle, we might have also like a game state. So that means we also need started rebinding, finished rebinding. Like I guess what are these events? Like if I go to these globals and we just add events in here. We jumped over an obstacle. We collide with obstacle. I guess I could just do this. Spaces are fine for that string. Okay, so we collide with the obstacle. We jumped over the obstacle. We start rebinding. What else can we have here? We end rebinding. So we start rebinding, we end rebinding, we collided with an obstacle, we jumped over an obstacle. And I would guess like that's probably like the main keys for this, like the main things we care about. So we've got jumped over an obstacle. Colliding with an obstacle would be next. Now we can't do collide with an obstacle right now because when we hit, we just do this if player is hitting game running equals false. So that means we're gonna have to refactor to a game state. So let's go ahead and to open up. I've been using Git Kraken recently for my my Git stuff. So this is game design patterns, stage all. Let's do what? I guess this is added notification for player jumping over obstacle.